Vale, momentu
Txantxat.
I can't hear anything. Is there something going on or not yet? Yeah.
Arratsaldeon, kaixo. My name is Imanol Galdos. I work in the Department of Culture of the City Council of Donostia. First, I want to thank all of you who have joined the webinar. Last year in Donostia, we organized an international congress on public diplomacy. From that successful event, we created the Donostia community of public diplomacy, and in December, we organized the first gastro diplomacy dialogue. So this is the second webinar in that series. Sport diplomacy is a fascinating field of public diplomacy. Donostia Cultura and the Sport Diplomacy Alliance of Australia have worked together to offer this exciting program. We really think the panel is terrific, and we thank each of the participants. Thanks also to the Department of Sport and Culture of the provincial government and the Department of Sport of the Basque government. And now I would like to introduce Eneko Goya, who is the mayor of the city of Donostia, who wants to welcome you to this event. Eneko, zurea da hitza.
I am Eneko Goya, mayor of Donostia San Sebastian. And first of all, I would like to thank all the participants who have joined this event today. Participants who represent many countries of the world and who represent the spirit of collaboration between countries, cultures, and citizens from all over the world. In the difficult and complicated times we live in today, we need each other more than ever, and sport is a very important tool in the path of reconciliation and building a better world. It is an honor for me, as the highest representative of the city, to inaugurate this international dialogue on sports diplomacy. I would like to thank the Sports Diplomacy Alliance for their interest in organizing this event from the very beginning. The collaborative work of the Sports Diplomacy Alliance and Donostia Cultura has resulted in an excellent panel of experts from around all the world. I would also like to thank the collaboration of the Department of Culture and Sports of the Provincial Council of Gipuzkoa, as well as the Directorate of Sports of the Basque government. Donostia is a city with a long tradition and relationship with sports. It is one of the cities with the largest number of professional teams in different sports at an international level. Secondly, it is a city where the practice of sport is widespread. A city that lives in sport for sport and for sport. Thirdly, Donostia is a city that has historically hosted major international sporting events. Next year, for example, it will be host one of the stages of the Tour de France and the prestigious international youth football tournament, the Donostia Cup. Donostia strongly believes in the value of sport to open up to the world and to make ourselves known in the world. I commend this exciting program to you and hope to see you all in the Basque Country soon. The dialogue that is being held today is one more step in a path that the City Council will continue to promote. Ongi etorri Donostiara eta mila esker. Thank you very much.
Eskerrik asko. Okay, eskerrik asko Eneko. Oso ondo. Now I would like to introduce you John Bitter. John Bitter is a long life friend, and he is a professor at the University of Boise, Idaho. He knows really well the Basque Country, and he's an active member of the Basque diaspora in Boise, Idaho. You probably know the Basque. Boise is probably one of our main references in our diaspora. And he was the founder of the Basque Studies Department in Boise. So I would like to introduce John. John, zure deitza, the floor is yours. John, aurrera.
Eskerrik asko, Imanol. Kaixo danori. It's a real pleasure and honor to be with you today and to participate and understand all the expertise that you have to share with us. I've been involved in sports all my life, from a participant, a fan, and also as an instructor at Boise State. I co-teach a course on sports values and identity using Athletic Bilbao from the Basque Country as a case study. We have an incredible panel. It's packed with expertise. We have enough for 2 days, but we're going to do the best that we can in 2 hours. This means we're going to have to be efficient with our time. What I mean by that is each of our speakers merits a lengthy introduction, but we will keep our introductions quite short in order to move things along in a timely fashion. Additionally, unfortunately, this also means that we won't be able to dedicate a lot of time to questions and comments, but we would ask that you please put them in the chat. Please put any questions or comments that you have in the chat, and we will follow up with email with each of the presenters and ask them to address any particular question that you have. So we very much would like to continue this conversation, but we'll do so after the webinar. Please include the name of the presenter when you type the question in the chat, if you would. We can also figure that out by timing, but if you think of it, please include their name. Finally, because of all the time differences that we have, not all presenters are able to be here in person, and some of them have taped their presentations. So, and that's actually the case with our first speaker, who will be coming to us via video. And Dr. Stuart Murray is our first speaker. He's the world's foremost sports diplomacy expert and the founder of the Sports Diplomacy Alliance, who's played such a critical role in organizing this webinar. He also serves as a global fellow at the University of Edinburgh. He's the author of the seminal book, Sport Diplomacy, Origins, Theory, and Practice. And today, Stuart will define and contextualize the term sports diplomacy and provide a range of examples of international practice. With that, I'll turn it over for Dr. Murray's video.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stuart Murray. I'm an Associate Professor of International Relations at Bond University and a Global Fellow at the Academy of Sport at the University of Edinburgh. And finally, I'm also a Senior Consultant at Sports Diplomacy Alliance. Today, I've got the pleasure of giving you the sort of big picture view of sports diplomacy, its origins, its theory, and its practice. And hopefully we'll cover 4 areas in the short time that I have with you today. The definitions of sports diplomacy in theory and in practice, the growing practice of sports diplomacy, a short case study on Australia's journey, and how all this relates, of course, most importantly, to the Basque Country. On that note, I have to say thank you very much, first of all, to Imanol and his team, as well as Gavin Price, and I would like to offer my congratulations on the Basque Country becoming the latest player to get into the sports diplomacy game. I really do wish I was there in person, in the country itself. I had the pleasure of visiting and touring the Basque Country in 2014, and I was really, really pleased to reacquaint myself with the area with Imanol via this project. True of Celtic cousins, Celtic people, there was little or no diplomatic estrangement straight away, as we quickly discussed our mutual affinity for landscapes, for mountains, for nature, for good food, and of course, good whiskey or cider. And we eventually got talking about the Basque Country and this project. So let me just share my screen with you, and then we can get cracking. Hopefully that's all working now. So as I mentioned, where to begin with this topic? Yes, so that's obviously sharing. Where to begin with this topic? Well, first of all, let's define those terms, which is very, very important when it comes to sports diplomacy. It's a new term to describe an old practice, the conscious and strategic use of sport to bring people, nations, and the institutions they form closer together via a love of physical pursuits. As you can see on the slide there, tens of thousands of years ago, the first Australians consciously used sport as a way to sublimate conflict, to settle disputes, and even to mimic war. Sport was a way of diffusing tension, proving that George Orwell's famous remark in 1948, that international sport was simply war minus the shooting, is absolutely nothing new. Thousands of years ago, the ancient Greeks used sport as a form of diplomacy from 786 BCE to 386 Common Era. Hundreds of years ago, Henry VIII and Francois I met at the Fields of Cloth of Gold summit in northern France for a couple of weeks to have a large sports summit to celebrate and consolidate the signing of the Anglo-French Treaty. And there was even a wrestling match between the two kings, which the English king actually lost, and some might say they're still smarting from that defeat. The 20th century is full of all sorts of examples, unusual examples. As you can see again in the photograph here, from the ugly mixing of sport, politics, and diplomacy in Berlin in 1936, and Italy 2 years later during what we call the fascist games. We also saw the ugly, equally ugly mixing of sport, ideology, and politically motivated violence during the Cold War era. And then at the bottom of the image, the screen there, you can see one of the most famous moments in sports diplomacy, the Springboks victory in 1995 during the Rugby World Cup, and the trophy handover by Nelson Mandela to Francois Pienaar, which is the stuff of legends. So in international affairs, we asked this question: why did no one do sports diplomacy theory until recently? And my research is, it's clear that IR and diplomacy scholars, international relations and diplomacy scholars and practitioners sort of dabbled in this area, but no one dug deeply, no one had written any theory, no one had actually wondered why sport had this power that sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. Many people seemed fearful or haunted by the dreadful cliche that sport and politics don't mix. This was a statement made by this gentleman up the top here, Avery Brundage, in 1972 in the shadow of the Munich tragedy. But sport and politics do mix. They do it all the time, and they do it for bad and good reasons. To repeat, it wasn't until about 2011 that the new field of sports diplomacy studies was born. It wasn't until then we actually started defining the terms, building theories, analysing data. I wrote, wrote thousands and thousands of words, spoke to people to try and understand this incredible phenomenon. And that's a really important point to make. Sports diplomacy is a young, new and dynamic field of studies that's achieved much in its short period of time. I like to think where we'll be in 10 years from now. It's very exciting. 2 points just to quickly conclude our conceptual overview. First of all, we do have a working definition you can see on the screen here. The strategic use of sport to bring people, nations and institutions closer together via a shared love of physical pursuits. The important point to make in this definition is the state and non-state actor focus. It's not just governments that do sports diplomacy. It's what we call a multi-actor field. The new practice, as I'll explain in a moment, is very much governments working in partnership with businesses, with sports teams, with sports clubs for win-win outcomes in the international arena. So it's no longer a whole of government approach, and particularly for some of the challenges we face in the 21st century, we need a whole of nation approach. We need everyone working on the problems we all face. And second, we actually now can confirm that we have a global field of studies, and I refer you to Verity Postlethwaite and Claire Jenkins' excellent journal article that's just about to come out, mapping over hundreds and hundreds of papers all over the world, from Brazil, China to the UK. It's wonderful. So there's a lot of people studying sports diplomacy. There's a lot of people practicing sports diplomacy. In 2019, I wrote a review of international practice for a government, and I'll just share some of those findings. We found that lots of regimes, or not lots, so one or two were starting to play the game, so to speak. Regimes such as the European Union, who for some bizarre reason call it sport diplomacy, not sports diplomacy. Sovereign states, many of them are well advanced. France, Australia, the Netherlands, Ireland, China, America, Spain, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, North Macedonia, just to name but a few. Lots of sub-states are entering into the arena. Wales, our host today, the Basque Country, Queensland, where I live and work half the year, Scotland, Quebec, and Hokkaido. There's lots of athlete activism, which will only actually take you so far. Politicians dread activists where they welcome diplomats in tracksuits. But lots of activists, athletes are appearing off the pitch to support good causes, such as gender inequality, climate change, injustice in the law. So sports people these days are working as hard off the pitch as they are on it. Naomi Osaka, the wonderful tennis player, snubbing the media, and I quote, knowing her power. Colin Kaepernick taking a knee and raising awareness of the dreadful situation for many Black and African Americans, and also inspiring a march around the world. The chap you can see in the photograph there is a man called David Pocock. He's a distinguished Australian rugby player, standing actually with Siya Kolisi, the captain of the South African team. David has taken it upon himself to form an organisation of 300 athletes all over the world to tell the place to cool down. The same might be said of progressive sporting regimes such as the World Surfing League and equal pay. Even armies are getting involved in sport and defence. And we have to remember that sport and defence, or sport actually is one of the oldest forms of conflict prevention. I could go on and on and on. Both the theory and practice of sports diplomacy are booming, and this is a good thing. We really need positive stories. We need positive phenomenon, civil devices such as sport and diplomacy. We face a rise of autocracy. We face the re-emergence of great power conflicts as seen in the Ukraine, simmering tensions over Taiwan, and we face a broad range of human security challenges, and we need new ways to solve these problems. Which brings me to the third part of my speech, looking at the Australian sports diplomacy journey. This is a really good example of that type of new approach I just referred to. As you know, the Australians have produced two world-leading strategies, Sports Diplomacy 2015 and 2018, and Sports Diplomacy 2030. They've recently moved into these bold, new, exciting areas. I refer you to Team Up, which is a brilliant sports development programme, and Pacific Oz Sports, which is slowly winning battles for hearts, minds, and bodies across the Pacific Ocean. Why did the Australian government do it? Well, first, because they weren't doing it. For many years, I heard people in Australia talk about how important sport was and how much they loved it and how much it was in their DNA. Our foreign minister even referred to sport as their national religion. And it's very, very true. It's a very sporty country. The weather certainly helps. But we argued if sport is so important to Australian culture and society, then why did it not feature in its diplomacy? After all, diplomacy is a representation of a country, its sending state. Secondly, we needed a new international approach to tap into the power of sport, to go over that idea of many people laying claim to the church of sport, so to speak. So this struggle over who owns sport or who should administer it was actually very valuable for us because it proved the argument we needed a new approach. Lots of other reasons you can see on the screen there. Low cost, low risk, high profile. It makes diplomacy fun, public and interesting, and it changes how people see us, and it also dovetails neatly with lots of exciting new innovative forms of soft power and diplomacy. The main reason that we actually did it is very simple. The point you can see down the bottom there, it helps us achieve our foreign policy goals. This is where we began in 2017 with this project. We looked at the white paper and we asked how could sport contribute to the foreign policy goals. And you can see a large list on the screen there, representing Australia, promoting Australia, exploring the world, and so on. Australia was particularly lucky. We had very good partnerships between academics, diplomats, business, and sports people. As you can see in the image here, we had ministerial champions. The Minister for Foreign Affairs is a huge supporter of the strategy. The Prime Minister, you can see running up the top there. We had lots of webinars, lots of workshops, lots of training to tell people what this is and how it works. And also we got a lot of runs on the board as well, i.e. making sure that the strategy worked, making sure we had some things that we could point to. So to conclude, how does all this relate to the Basque Country? Well, what is Basque sports diplomacy? How do we define it? Well, this is it. This webinar is a great example of innovation, teamwork, quality players, and international partners ranging from Australia, the US, Holland, the UK, the Basque Country, and many others. Like our Australian team, the cast of players in your team would be the envy of many. So much so it could be argued you're sitting on top of a sports diplomacy goldmine. And all, you have a brilliant inspirational manager with a good co-manager in Gavin Price. And what they've done in the space of a few months with this webinar is quite amazing, nimble, adaptive, exciting, and passionate. From Donostia Cultura to Wave Garden or Bia, Real Sociedad, Atletico, you have a world-class lineup of outstanding players and assets. But to me, in my enduring memory from my visit to your beautiful country, was the landscapes, the waves, the mountains, the rivers, home these days for a rapidly growing breed of sports person, the extreme sports adventurist. Indeed, the merging of nature with sport and diplomacy, to me, is the future of 21st century sports diplomacy, and an area that the business I work for, Sports Diplomacy Alliance, is moving into. I commend Eman, his team, Gavin, and all of you for your role in what could be the start of a very exciting journey. This webinar is a really important start, usually followed by a physical dialogue, getting all the players from sport, business, government, academia in the room, designing, implementing, and measuring and evaluating a strategy. None of this is easy, none of it is fast, but it is worthwhile. The most important thing in sports diplomacy is not to languish in the bleachers, but to get on the pitch, to have a go, as we say in Australia, to make a start. And that, to me, is what this webinar represents, the first of many annual Basque sports diplomacy dialogues. I actually heard there's maybe something we can do next year in 2023. I heard there's a small bicycle race happening there. I hope to visit you all then, to meet with you and to share some sport and culture. I hope to return to those beautiful mountains, waves, forests, and rivers, for part of my heart still lingers there. All the best for this afternoon. Thank you very much for listening, and welcome to the team. Welcome to the Sports Diplomacy Alliance. As we say in Australia, game on.
We thank Stuart for that dynamic introduction, and we'll continue the conversation now with our next presenter, Dr. Emily Roenick. Emily spent 10 years as a diplomat for the US State Department with a specialization in public diplomacy, serving in Caracas, St. Petersburg, and Copenhagen. Prior to her diplomatic career, Emily volunteered and worked in Ukraine for 3 years, and currently works with international partnerships and knowledge management at the Danish nonprofit Sport for Development organization, GAME. And Emily, I'll turn it over to you.
Much. I'm going to try to share my screen now, so just bear with me for 1 second. Can everybody see my screen in full presentation mode? Good. Thank you again, John. Also, thank you for promoting me because, in fact, I'm not a doctor, but I like that title. So maybe you've inspired me to look into a PhD. Thanks, everyone. I can see from the list that we've got an international group here today, which is right up my alley. And I am going to share some insights from the United States in the parentheses there, government's approach to sports diplomacy. And I hope by the end of my presentation, you'll understand why I have the word government in parentheses. Briefly about me, I don't want to repeat anything that John said. I just really wanted to include this picture of me playing high school soccer because my thighs were amazing then. They don't look like that anymore, but I am a lifelong soccer player. I still play. Now I play on a team in the Danish league called Old Girls. I've got a quite international perspective after about more than 15 years overseas, married with 2 kids. And yeah, that's me. And I know everyone's on mute, and I want to know if anyone knows anything about American football. I wish I could see like raising of hands, but I'm guessing most people, Mithran says yes, Anirban says yes. That's not a lot of yeses. I'm guessing we don't have a lot of big fans out there. But I'm going to start us out with a quiz. It's an easy quiz, there's only one question. And I want to know how many people know this guy. And if I could again see a show of hands, because I bet there would be a lot more hands to this last question than the first question. So this is, of course, Colin Kaepernick, who was very active in the fight for racial justice in the United States. We're going to come back to Colin. So I thought that I would also start out with a little bit of a controversial, I'm sorry that this is kind of in the way here. I'm going to start out with a controversial statement here. American government basics, why we are world champions in everything. I hope I've made a lot of people angry. And of course, we're not world champions in everything, I know that. But what I'm trying to get out here is that the US government and the US people, you know, we work a little bit differently. I'm trying to have some fun here, so bear with me. We work a little bit differently from other people. We don't have ministries, we don't have departments. We don't call it football, we call it soccer. We love to be independent, or we think we're independent. And of course, we're not world champions in everything, but this gentleman that you see by the Albanian flag on the bottom corner of your screen, he was my college soccer coach, Ness, and he was originally from Albania. And he's been in the US 40 years now, but he always used to comment on American society. And he'd say, you know, you guys, you just made up all of these sports. You just made up baseball, you made up basketball, you made up American football, because you just wanted to be different. You just wanted to be the best. But this kind of feeling of independence, it gets me into a little bit of what I think we need to talk about and to understand if we're going to understand sports diplomacy. So bear with me for this little American philosophy, American political science lesson. But the US government, the national government or the federal government, is really built on the fear of a too powerful government. And really the philosophy of the US Constitution and the founding of our country is to leave as much decision-making to the individuals or to the state governments as possible. It's almost like the national government or the federal government is a last resort, or yeah, it covers the basics for what we need to stay together as a country, but other than that, we just leave it alone and you guys decide, you live your life the way you want. So the United States does not have a Ministry of Sports. It does not have a Ministry of Culture. It does not have a Ministry of Youth. We do have a Department of Education, but even that functions a lot differently than probably the Ministry of Educations in a lot of your countries. The Department of Education in the US, it doesn't set policy. It doesn't set standards or curriculum. It's just supplemental. It's complementary to the efforts of the state governments and the local governments who set their own education policy. So according, following along with that philosophy, we don't have a Ministry of Sports, and the US government does not fund its Olympic Committee. The Olympic Committee is a private organization, it's a private NGO, and it raises funds on its own. And I promise I'm almost done with the history lesson here. So if we ask ourselves, what can the federal government do, or what can the national government do? Basically, the US Constitution and its amendments lays it out and says, listen, we're going to give a couple jobs to the national government here. And any job that we haven't listed means the US government isn't in charge of it. Then they don't get to decide those things. It will be the local governments that decide them. And so one of the things that's spelled out is foreign trade and international relations. That is a job of the national government. Education? Nope. Sports? Nope. So that means those things are not driven by, those are not run by the US government. But does the United States have education? Of course. Do we have sports? Of course. But by and large, really for the most part, these are very private sector, individual, local, state, local government affairs. All right, now the fun stuff. Sports diplomacy is a part of the United States government's foreign policy. And I've got a couple slides on this. So here's slide one, part one. So why does the US government include sports and sports diplomacy as part of its foreign policy? Couple really nice reasons. Friendship, it's a great way to meet people. It's a great way to build up positive relations between countries and between people of those countries. Mutual understanding. Sometimes it's hard to get to know people who look different and speak a different language. People-to-people relationships. The sports diplomacy initiatives that the US government has, by and large, not exclusively, but by and large are focused on getting individuals from one country to meet individuals of another country, mostly the US, but not only. And this is not limited to sports. As we heard, music, arts, these are also some of the new ways to reach people. So that's the really nice slide. This is the more cynical slide. This is the more realistic slide. There's another reason why the US government engages in sports diplomacy, and that's something called soft power, which probably most of you have already heard of. It was a concept, maybe it's not fair to say developed, but defined or named by an American political scientist. I think it was back in the 80s. And his idea was seduction is always more effective than coercion. And the idea is to attract and co-opt others into wanting the same things that you want. Country soft power is rested on three resources: its culture, its political values, and its foreign policy. And again, not just about sports, music, film, technology, clothes. So the United States government does have an official sports diplomacy office. It is housed in the State Department, which is the Foreign Ministry. It's housed in the State Department's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, which is in Washington, D.C. And I myself worked there for 2 years, and I see one of my former colleagues, Trina, I think is joining us today. Hi, Trina. And the Sports Diplomacy Office has a few different types of pillar programs. One of them is the Sports Envoy Program, where we'll send out very well-known American athletes to go and do programs, people-to-people programs in cooperation with our embassies overseas. We have Sports Visitors Program, where we bring coaches and youth to come to the United States. And it's important to add, these are not professional coaches, not professional athletes, it's just regular people. Sports grants, where we fund US based NGOs to engage in sports diplomacy. and a program that is focused on empowering women and girls through sports. And I neglected to add, there's a new program since the time I've been there that's focused on disabilities. And this office was founded in, I think it was 2002 or 2003, in the wake of September 11th, 2001, as trying to increase outreach to the Muslim world. And part 4, my slide on sports diplomacy as part of the US government's foreign policy. The office is really small. In 2021, you can see there that the US State Department request was $41 billion US. Like, that's a lot of money. The sports diplomacy office was around 6 million. And you can see that as a teeny, tiny percentage. It would not be true to say that's the exclusive amount that the US government spends on sports diplomacy, because there are other initiatives here and there through different government agencies like USAID. There is some military to military programs. When I was in Venezuela, we had our own sports diplomacy programs that were funded by an agency called the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement, but it's not a huge sum of money. So in general, it's a tiny fraction of the overall foreign policy budget of the United States. So it's a small budget, but you know, it works. And the focus is on hard to reach groups, and that means populations, people, and governments. And when I say hard to reach, in terms of populations, I mean when we do typical sort of educational people-to-people programs. For example, if we want to invite people to study in the US, well, if someone only speaks Thai, it's difficult for them to study in the United States. But if someone only speaks Thai or Czech, well, they can still come and engage in a sports diplomacy program because you don't really need language on the field, right? This is also true of governments. Sometimes we don't really have a lot that we can talk to another government about without getting into a big argument with them. So sports is a kind of safe entry into bilateral relations, a starting point for dialogue. And you can't see it here, but I have written, come for badminton, but please stay for trade policy. Sit down for an appetizer of hockey, and perhaps we can discuss nuclear disarmament over dessert. And these are just some photos of different exchange programs. So these are some Japanese baseball players who are sitting with Hillary Clinton and the Japanese ambassador, and a very famous American baseball player. This is President Obama shooting hoops with some Russian kids who are on an exchange program. And this is our former Secretary of State, John Kerry, in Afghanistan, getting a ball signed by the captain of the Afghanistan women's national team. So these are just some visual examples. And absolutely, the United States government could not do this without our private sector partners. And that's the US, for example, the US Olympic Committee and Paralympic Committee, the federations, USA Softball, USA Soccer, and of course, private leagues like the NBA, they're probably our biggest league partner. And then other private corporations like ESPNW, which is a media conglomerate focused on women's sports. And so when we work with the NBA, it's got a great brand, a huge budget. Does it really need us? So why do these private sector sports organizations partner with the US? A couple different reasons. More and more we see, not just in the NBA, but companies, private companies, it really matters to their employees that they feel like they're a part of the social change awakening that's going on in the US and in many places of the world. Approximately 25% of the NBA's players are actually foreign born, not born in the United States. So it means a lot to them to engage. The NBA also realizes that if it wants to grow, well, that growth is happening overseas. And there are doors that the United States government can open that the NBA can't open on their own, and vice versa. And so who needs who in the relationship? Oh, I think it's kind of, it goes both ways. There are definitely benefits that the US government gets from working with these private organizations, and there are definitely benefits that these private organizations get from working with the United States. And so, you know, I started by saying, or earlier I said, the United States government sports diplomacy budget, it's pretty tiny. It's a teeny tiny portion of the overall foreign policy budget. Does it need to be bigger? I don't know. So I'm going to come back to this guy, Colin. The United States government sports diplomacy programs are really, they're highly effective. And they're a relatively small part of the US government foreign policy budget. But I argue that sports diplomacy is a large part of de facto American foreign policy anyway. And when I call it de facto American foreign policy, this is where I come back to Colin Kaepernick. And if you'll allow me to tell you a little story, years ago when I lived in Ukraine, I had a Moroccan friend. And one day I caught my Moroccan friend, Suhail, just sitting there to himself singing a John Denver song. John Denver is an American country singer, very American. And I looked at him and I said, why on earth do you even know a John Denver song? And he turned to me and he said, Emily, you're American and you forget. You export your culture. People know American films, they know American movies. And so I argue that they know American sports and they know the movement and the social movements and the activism of athletes, including American athletes like this gentleman, Colin Kaepernick. You may not be an American football fan, but you know who Colin Kaepernick is. And I would say that one thing that Colin Kaepernick knows, that the US government knows, that all of us here today knows, that sports is more than just a game, and it matters. Thank you. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Emily. I'm glad you enjoyed your honorary doctoral degree. I think you've earned it. We're going to keep moving along here to our next presenter, Gavin Price. Gavin, it's been a pleasure to get to know Gavin and to work with him as one of the representatives. He and Mano have really been the two workhorses on putting this webinar together. Gavin works with the Sports Diplomacy Alliance and also at Bond University. He's an honorary member of the Center for Sports Law, Policy, and Diplomacy at the University of Rijeka, an expert in sports paradiplomacy. Gavin will provide practical examples of sports diplomacy in small nations, including practitioner experiences in Wales. Pleasure to have you, Gavin, and take it over if you would, please.
Eskerrik asko, thank you, John. And Arasalda on to everybody online today. It's great to be with you from Wales, or Gales as it's known in the Basque Country and Spain. As John said, I'm Gavin Price. I'm the European and UK lead for the Sports Diplomacy Alliance, and I'm also a lead on this amazing project with the Basque Country. For me, it's a huge privilege to work with Imanol, Galdos, Donostia, Cultura, and all our amazing partners. So before I kick off and talk about sports diplomacy in small nations, I just wanted to say a huge thanks to everybody who's participating today online, all of our speakers. Without you, this cannot happen. So I'll indulge in a Gareth Bale heart sign and just say thank you very much to everybody. Okay, I'll just share my screen if you bear with me. Okay. Okay, I'm hoping everybody can see it. Maybe Imanol can give me a thumbs up if it looks good. Thank you, fantastic. So, sports diplomacy in small nations, or Kirol diplomazia nazioarteko. I hope you can sort of understand my go at Basque, but look, it's really important. Coming from a small nation in Wales, language and niche languages are really, really important. They give you a sense of belonging and place. So I encourage anybody who visits the Basque Country to just try and learn a bit of the language. Say if you come to Wales or anywhere else, it will stand you in good stead and it will help you understand the culture. Just a bit of context on me. So I'm a native of Wales. I grew up there, but I spent around 15 years in Australia. I'm a huge sports fan. I've played football in Germany, in Australia, in England and Wales. I've traveled the world watching sport, a lot of international sport, the Australian and Welsh national teams at football, Olympics, that kind of thing. But I'm also studying sports diplomacy, particularly sports diplomacy in small nations. So my current PhD at Bond University is about small nations with large sporting footprints. Certainly, I classify the Basque Country in that space. It has an embarrassment of sport and riches, as Stuart Murray pointed out in his presentation. I've visited the Basque Country on numerous occasions over the last 20 years. In fact, I love the place so much. Genuinely, I spent my 40th birthday in the Basque Country, watching Real Sociedad, who I know, Imanol is a big supporter of Real. I've also been to Athletic Bilbao games, been to watch Basque Pelota and other Basque sports. It's a fantastic place. So if you've never been there, I encourage you to visit. And, you know, for me, it's a real privilege to explore the sporting riches of another nation, and a beautiful nation like the Basque Country. So just very quickly, the running order, I'll talk a little bit about what we mean by small nations, talk about their advantages, talk a little bit about what we mean by sub-states, think a little bit about paradiplomacy. It's a bit of a sort of slippery construct that some of you may or may not be familiar with, and then think about sports paradiplomacy. Then I'll look at 3 brief case studies. So Wales, or Cymru, as it's known in Welsh, North Macedonia, and then New Zealand, or Aotearoa, sorry, as it's known in the Maori language. And then I'll just try to give some, I guess, some tips and pointers for other small nations or regions or cities that might be wanting to embark on a sports diplomacy journey. So first up, small nations. I mean, what are they? Well, you could measure them in many ways, but if you use the common indicator of population size, it's been a kind of fluid story. So in the 70s and 80s, it was roughly around sort of 5 million or less people. The 90s, even more fluid. So the Commonwealth Secretariat that looks after the Commonwealth nations had it as low as 1.5 million, but I guess they had many small island states and microstates within the Commonwealth family. Or into the sort of 2010 and the noughties, it's been as high as 12 million by some experts. So point is, there's no hard and fast rule. 12 million can include, you know, many European states, certainly, and I've listed a few there: Australia, Ireland, Kosovo, Portugal. But if you think about it, it applies to around 2/3 of the United Nations 193 members. Small nations are not insignificant. They do wield considerable power, especially in coalitions. It's also worth pointing out that small nations are some of the wealthiest and most innovative on the planet. I mean, you could argue this is for good and bad reasons, but there are a lot of positive stories there. So places like Singapore, Norway, Luxembourg, Switzerland, Bermuda, and there are many others. So small nations and their advantages. So a lot of the international relations literature basically argues that, you know, many small nations need a larger power or superpowers to look out for them, to look over their shoulder for security reasons and economics. But I just want to point out that there are many advantages for small nations. So I think, you know, generally speaking, they're more aware of their vulnerability, and they're more willing to compromise and cooperate in alliances. And this helps them to, I guess, pool their resources, avoid conflict, you know, build ties and friends. So if you think of something like the Alliance of Small Island States, they're pulling together to try and avoid the dangers of climate change and the climate catastrophe. Or even Benelux, you know, it's a very important European economic and trade bloc between Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg that is well established. They also are, a lot of small countries have short distances between their major cities. So there's some travel times between major cities in a few countries there, but, you know, Edinburgh to Glasgow in Scotland is 1 hour, Vienna to Graz in Austria, 2.5 hours. So they can get people in the room quickly. And more importantly, they tend to have smaller groups of decision makers. It's by no means perfect. They have their own bureaucracy, but I think it does help them get smaller groups together more often. And that can build trust between people who know each other better, rather than large countries who may have internal, I guess, geopolitical issues sometimes. If you look at maybe large federal countries with many states. Look, there are pros and cons to both models, but you get my point. I'd also argue, and again, this is a bit tongue-in-cheek, that, you know, smaller countries can project a greater sense of cultural nationhood. If you look at the UK, it has 4 nations: Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, England. Somewhere like Scotland and Wales can get kind of lost in the mix sometimes. You know, that a lot of the centralized foreign policy comes from London and the Westminster government. But, you know, when they do stuff under their own flag and branding, I would argue it's a little more distinct, and they can bring in things like language, culture, music, art, and so on. Sub-state nations such as Puerto Rico, Catalonia, Scotland, the Basque Country, they're also less preoccupied with hard power. They can leave those kind of things to Washington or Madrid or London. They don't need to worry about so much about nuclear proliferation or international security. They can focus on soft power mechanisms. So all those good things I mentioned earlier, like culture, language, music, tourism, arts, gastronomy, which the Basque Country has already explored in this seminar series, and of course, sport, which we're talking about today. So sub-states, again, this is a kind of slippery construct, but I think it's important to kind of define them for the sake of this webinar. So it's a single term that is not universally accepted, but it's increasingly accepted by many experts and academics to describe small countries and regions who are not sovereign nations, but they demonstrate significant measures of political devolution and have a strong sense of cultural nationhood. Again, I mentioned Scotland and Wales in the UK, Catalonia and the Basque Country in Spain, Wallonia, Flanders in Belgium, Quebec in Canada. There are many other examples. Just to mention, it is a contentious and confusing space. There are many other labels that some people can get a little hot under the collar about for different reasons, but you'll see terms like subnational government, devolved, provincial, regional, but I think sub-state is the best. The reason being is that I think sub-states are polities in their own right. They represent the immediate level of governance below the central state, and they do have some form of constitutional grounding, and they're usually territorial defined by some level of legal or administrative body. So, for example, the Basque Country has the Eusko Jaurlaritza. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that properly, but that's the regional Basque government, and then other levels of government under that that show that the Basque Country is its own polity within the central state of Spain. Also, it's a confusing space because we could apply it to other notable sub-state actors within federal nations. So you could think of a small player like California, which has its own distinct identity, or Queensland, Victoria in Australia, Uttar Pradesh in India. There are many examples around the world. So paradiplomacy. So if paradiplomacy itself is the international activities of sub-state nations, and traditionally that's been things like trade and tourism and those more traditional disciplines, sports paradiplomacy, I would argue, is basically collapsing Stuart Murray's term for sports diplomacy and paradiplomacy into one. So this is my working definition. SPD, or sports paradiplomacy, is a sub-state or a devolved administration's unique style of diplomacy undertaken at the regional or international level through and or independent of its central government, aiming to strategically co-opt sport to build relationships, attain policy goals, amplify profile, attractiveness as a place to invest, study, trade, or visit. Crucially, it can also involve significant actors in city municipalities. The Donostia mayor in Nico pointed out that Donostia is a sports city in its own right. We could also point to Bilbao, but many cities around the world you could see are notable sub-state actors: Manchester, New York, Shanghai. There are many, many around the world. And I think also there are some really kind of cool examples of sports clubs operating in sub-state settings, doing what I call sports diplomacy. So if we look at some of the peace and football work that Barcelona Football Club in Catalonia has done in the Palestinian territories, that might be a good example of a sporting sub-state actor, so a club acting in the sports diplomacy space. So now on to my case studies. Look, I'm going to gloss over these for the sake of time, but as a native for Wales, I was heavily involved in sports diplomacy in Wales. I think it's useful for the Basque Country because Wales is roughly on a similar scale. If we accept generally that there are around 3 million people of Basque ethnicity within the Basque region, whether that's the Spanish part of the Basque Country or the French part of the Basque Country, and there's around 3 million people in Wales, Wales and the Basque Country have ancient cultures, and they both have their own unique languages. So there are some parallels there, and they both have, I guess, loosely Celtic connections at least. So in 2020, Stuart Murray and I handed down a research report to the British Council in Wales called Towards a Welsh Sports Diplomacy Strategy. As part of the fieldwork for this project, we consulted around 140 stakeholders across the Welsh sportscape and globally. So I'm talking everybody with an interest in Welsh sport, whether that was government, academia, civil society, diplomats, sports people, athletes, you name it. If they had an interest, we spoke to them and we asked them a simple question: what role should sport play in Wales's international engagement and global profile? As you can imagine, we had a very rich and diverse response. On the right-hand side of that slide, you can see that that is a high-level sports diplomacy policy which the Welsh government released last year. It's a work in progress, but you can see there are some short and medium-term actions. At the moment, they're quite high level. So they're things like partnering with the Football Association of Wales to promote Wales on the world stage at major football tournaments such as Euro 2021 last year. And hopefully if we win our qualifying game against either Ukraine or Scotland, we'll also be in Qatar. That's a really big deal for Wales, you know, a country of 3 million to be on the world stage. So that's just one example, but there are other markers on there. If I had more time, I'd talk about them. But what I do want to say is there's evidence that sports paradiplomacy is working for Wales already. One of the most interesting examples we have at the last couple of weeks, on March the 1st, it was St. David's Day in Wales. That's the Welsh National Day. Every year, the Welsh government hosts an event in North America. But this year, it partnered with Wrexham Football Club, which is in North Wales. It's in the fifth tier, it plays in the fifth tier of the English football structure. So it's by no means a superpower, but the club has been taken over by Hollywood's Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney. So they organized a St. David's Day event in LA, where there were multiple dignitaries, people from government, trade, business, other Hollywood stars. So the point I'm making, a humble football club in North Wales suddenly has a platform in Los Angeles, you know, marketing Wales to the world. Rob and Ryan are actually making a documentary called Welcome to Wrexham. Pilots have gone out already. It's a Netflix production. And interestingly, Rob and Ryan are both learning Welsh. So some of the pilots are going out in Welsh. Now that's a really big deal for Wales to have people of that profile from North America, big stars, speaking Welsh, talking about Wales. It has to be good for our profile, for tourism, and to help us build ties with the world. On a more formal level, the Welsh government sent its largest ever delegation to the Rugby World Cup in Japan in 2019, and there are legacy projects ongoing about that. But they erected a large dome in one of the major shopping centers in Tokyo. They hosted seminars, trade events, cultural events. If you look in the top left-hand corner of my screen, I mean, there was a moment where the Welsh national rugby team was training in Japan, and 15,000 Japanese school kids turned up, and they all sang the Welsh national anthem in Welsh. Now these ties have continued, and there are lots of exchanges between schools, and there's Welsh kids learning Japanese, and vice versa. So another example of how sport can build ties between nations. The last one I'll point out is around representation. So luckily for Wales, it has full membership in FIFA and UEFA and at World Rugby. So one of the recommendations is to increase Wales's membership on major committees of these bodies. So Professor Laura McAllister, who actually played football for Wales women, she's a professor of governance at Cardiff University. She wrote the foreword of the Welsh report I mentioned earlier. She was backed by the Football Association of Wales and UEFA as the women's candidate for election to FIFA's biggest council. Now, she didn't get it this time, but she won many votes, which is amazing for the first time around, because the incumbent was an Italian who's been in the job for many years. But it did raise the profile of Wales, and we are looking to promote Welsh people onto other world governing bodies. So, you know, for Wales, you know, something like FIFA is a chance to rub shoulders with major nations like the US or Spain or France or China or whoever it may be. whereas we don't have direct representation at things like the United Nations. That's done through the United Kingdom system. So it's a big deal for us. Okay, my second case study is related to North Macedonia. I might zip through this one quickly for the sake of time, but I just wanted to give a big thanks to Sylvia Matevska, who is the advisor to the Prime Minister of the Republic of North Macedonia on sport, for helping me with this information. But North Macedonia is an emerging nation state. I mean, I say that it's an ancient country, it has an ancient history, but it's been a UN member since about 1993, so I use emerging loosely. But look, North Macedonia is doing some really cool work. So it recently qualified for its first Euros in 2021. Its men's national team played games in Bucharest as part of that tournament. And what it did was it put on a bilateral trade event with Romania, and it looked on it strengthening ties between North Macedonia and Romania around trade and investment. I understand that there were a lot of great economic outcomes from that event. They followed that up in 2022 with a bilateral French-Macedonian sports diplomacy event. Many dignitaries there. The French sports ambassador was present in Skopje for the event. That's helped strengthen bilateral ties between both countries, and they've been sharing information and ideas ever since. They're also looking to formalize sports diplomacy in a public diplomacy strategy that's underway at the moment. Watch this space, that will be forthcoming. Interestingly, they had a huge win in a World Cup qualifying game over Italy. Remember, they're European champions. That was a big deal for North Macedonia. It gave them a global profile. 3 of their players have been given diplomatic passports. Now, you may think, so what? But the idea about that is that these are people that maybe when they finish their careers, they can be on the world stage representing North Macedonia in trade, tourism, cultural relations forums, and helping promote the nation. I should just point out, Sylvia does a lot of amazing work in relation to women's empowerment and sort of backing minority groups and encouraging cooperation through sport and leadership in the Western Balkans, North Macedonia, and also as part of the EU sport diplomacy team. I suspect Carol may mention a few things about that a little later in her presentation relating to the EU. There's a few photos there. Sylvia's in the top left-hand corner at the event with France next to the EU flag and the Macedonian flag and NATO. Top right-hand corner, you can see the Romanian delegation, but it's a great example of formal sports diplomacy in action. Okay, the last case study relates to New Zealand, or Aotearoa. And New Zealand does not have a formal sports diplomacy strategy. One's been mooted, but there's not one in place. But they have used lots of sports diplomacy activities for quite a period of time. So a good example is they integrated sport into the lobbying process to try and get a seat at the UN Security Council. And they did that by hosting the Maori All Blacks team versus the US Eagles in Philadelphia. If you think about it, the All Blacks brand is one of the strongest sports brands in the world. Rugby is still a relatively niche sport outside of the major countries, but most people know the All Blacks, and they're certainly familiar with the Maori haka ceremonial war dance that the players do before the game. It's really iconic. You know, it's a really cool cultural relations tool for New Zealand. They've used the All Blacks partnership with UNICEF to raise awareness and funds for vulnerable children. More recently, they've appointed a Pacific Sports Ambassador, Dame Valerie Adams. Her role is to carry out sports diplomacy in the Pacific region, really important strategic region for New Zealand. They're trying to win hearts and minds in the region for security reasons, development regions, and just build stronger ties and underpin existing ties between Pacific Island nations and New Zealand. And then, of course, we have the 2023 Women's World Cup coming up. Now, that's a cool example of bilateral sports diplomacy. It's being co-hosted by Australia and New Zealand. I think that event is a great example of social inclusion. It's very strong in empowering women in sports and very good with First Nation languages. So for the first time, to my knowledge, at least in New Zealand, certainly in Australia, seeing the venues named using Indigenous languages. So Wellington, Te Wanganui Atara, or Sydney, which is called Gadigal in one of the First Nations Australian language. I think that's a really cool step, especially in an Australian context. So just to wrap up really quickly.
Yeah, go ahead, Gavin, go ahead, wrap up.
You sure, John? Do I have time? I can leave it there if it's too long.
If you wouldn't mind wrapping up, that would be great. We're running a little over.
Sure, no worries. So very quickly, just some tips for anybody, any small country embarking on a sports diplomacy journey. Governments can play a coordinating role, but look, they don't own sport. It's important that they consult with all levels of the sportscape, so academia, civil society, sports club, and so on. Social inclusion is really important part of that. It's really important to listen to women, minority groups, and particularly future generations. Often they're underrepresented in the conversation. Really try to look for synergies with other cultural relations activity, whether that's language, art, history, media, and so on. But as a quick process, step 1 is today's webinar, hopefully introduce sports diplomacy and starts the conversation. Step 2, do your research. 3, strategize. 4, implement. And 5, evaluate. John, I will leave it at that because we have a packed agenda. Skerrick Gaskell to everybody, and thank you for listening.
Gavin, thank you so much, and for all the work that you've done putting this webinar together. We really appreciate it.
John, sorry to take up so much time. You have a difficult job.
Our next presenter is Carol Gomez, and since 2013, Carol has worked as a senior research fellow at the Institute of International and Strategic Relations. She focuses on sports diplomacy, integrity in sport, and sport governance reform. She is currently leading an Erasmus Plus sport project dedicated to work on European Union sport diplomacy. I do need to remind all the presenters that we are in a very tight timeline, so we appreciate you being just as succinct as possible. We'll turn this over to Carol now. Carol, thanks.
Yeah, many thanks, John, for this introduction. Hi, everyone. I will not make use of offense to try to talk Basque, even though I really like Basque Country. So I will try to save my words. As John told us, I'm leading a European project called Towards a New Sports Diplomacy, and I will try to let you know a little bit about another type of sport diplomacy from a supranational organization. So maybe just in order to not to repeat what it was said before by Stuart Murray, Emily Roenick, or Gavin Price, I will try to explain why and when the EU as an actor decided to focus on sport diplomacy. It was quite interesting to see that since 2007, the European Union became very interested in sport, because they really thought they can do something about this. There are a few reflection about it with the white paper, with the white book, with the Pierre de Coubertin action plan, and then it was more concrete thanks to the Lisbon Treaty, and sport became a shared, not a shared competence, but a topic of interest for the European Union. So it was something that we need to create, that they really understand that it was really important to focus on this one. And quite interestingly, in 2015, the former Commissioner Navracsics launched two focus group, two high-level group on a report. The first one was on grassroots sport and how to develop grassroots sport at the European level. And he also developed, and he also asked to a high-level group to work on sport diplomacy and how the EU can use sport diplomacy. It was quite interesting to see that to try to understand why the European Union decided to focus on sport diplomacy. As Emily Roenick said, it was really, they understand that it was a really interesting tool for soft power in order to express the power. We know that there is a lot of critics about the European Union, but sport could be another way to express, to be active and to do something in order to get people around the table and to do concrete action. It was also, and it was developed during in this report of the high-level group. It was developed, or it could be really useful also to strengthen links between member states, but also it was quite interesting to see that it was not just only a tool within the European Union, but also to develop other link with countries, especially, for example, with in the Balkan countries, but or in other countries, for example, in Asia or in Africa. And at this and to make a link with what Gavin said, it was quite interesting to see how many projects were developed between the EU and North Macedonia, for example, through sport. And they really understand that sport could be something like not a magic stick, but something like a tool, a common dialogue that we can use in order to make progress on several issues, on very specific issue linked to sport, or more importantly, on other issues. It was also quite interesting to see that the European Union developed many initiatives on this one. For example, they developed Erasmus project. They called for Erasmus project, and I will talk about my project a little bit later. They developed many studies about what could EU sport diplomacy could be. They developed also events, for example, during the EU Sport Forum, or during the European Week of Sport. You can definitely focus on sport diplomacy and try to discover what is your national sport diplomacy, or how two countries from the European Union decided to collaborate to put good practice together and to try to have a common reflection on this one. However, and it was the very starting point of our project, our reflection. Even though the European Union identified that the sport diplomacy could be a very interesting tool, and even though they developed many initiatives, there were not a very clear roadmap about what will be the next step and what will be the clear objectives. For example, it was just a short story, but it could help you to understand. At IRIS, I work with many people specialized in the European Union, and they didn't even know that sports diplomacy was one of the topics that they were working on it. And the other things is, at the same time, if you want to see if a topic is really important for a state, for a city, for supranational organization, you just have to see if who is in charge. And it's quite interesting to see that, for example, for the EU sports diplomacy, since few months now, it's not a very, you don't have a dedicated people in charge of the promoting of this one, because it will be in every single organization to try to develop its own sports diplomacy. So it will be at the same time really interesting to see that, but on the other hand, it could be really difficult to have a very clear objective, very clear roadmap in order to develop. So that's why we developed the TESD project, TESD for towards a new sports diplomacy. As I told you, it was an Erasmus Plus project. It began last year, and it will be finished. It will finish at the end of this year. We are 8 partners from 8 countries, from 6 countries. Belonging to the European Union, because we have 2 British university, but even though Brexit occurs, we still have contact with them, of course, and their inputs are really interesting with the project. So we have one university in Madrid, Carlos III de Madrid, TOAS, ISCA, which is International Sport and Culture Association, Université Catholique de Louvain in Belgium, Università Cattolica di Santa Croce di Milano, Edge Hill University, and UNEF's visit in Bucharest in Romania. And just to sum up the project, the idea was to try to first, and it's really important for us to try to develop a European network of relevant stakeholders, because a lot of people, and this meeting today is especially relevant on this one. A lot of people are interested or are working on sports diplomacy, so we definitely need to gather all the forces together and try to put everyone around the table and see what are the thoughts, what are the inspiration, and what we can do together for the next step. And the second goal of the project will be to try to make fruitful thought for the European Union and try to develop policy recommendation for a more concrete implementation of the EU sports diplomacy. We are not the first project working on this one. Many other projects already try to develop and try to draw a strategy for the European Union sports diplomacy, but we will try to complete the path, and in order to make it more concrete. I know that I was already too long regarding my chronometer, so just a few information about the TESI project, and I will definitely be at your disposal if you need any question, if you have any remark, or if you are interested in this project and in EU sports diplomacy. And just a final word, two final words. The first one is we will have the conclusion of this project at the end of the year. So if you are interested in this conclusion, do not hesitate to tell me. And second things, and I really want to thank you, all of you and all the organizers for such a great event. It's really important to have this kind of meeting, even though it is still virtual. But I really looking forward to seeing you next year all together. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Appreciate your presentation. Our next presenter is Dr. Verity Postlethwaite. Verity is a member of the sport business team. She joined Hartpury University in August of 2021 and also works with SOAS University of London. Dr. Postlethwaite will use her vast experiences and ongoing research around Japan and its Sports for Tomorrow initiative to explore and illustrate opportunities to make sports diplomacy inclusive of parasport. Very important. So, Verity, I'll turn this over to you.
Thanks. John, first of all, can you hear me? And second of all, can you see slides?
Yes, we can.
Awesome.
Both.
Awesome. Greetings, everyone. And thank you, John, for the wonderful introduction. Also, a huge thank you to Emmanuel and Gavin for setting this event up, and lovely to meet you all. And also thank you for listening in English. My Basque and other European or world languages are nowhere near as good as I'm sure everyone else's are, so I very much appreciate it. I have a ton of links and points in this presentation, which is going to take approximately 7 minutes. So John, please cut me off at that point. So I've just put all of it in a blog post so that you can follow up with it or comment on it either in the chat now or after the event. The presentation has been made possible by a number of generous people and organisations. I just wanted to give a shout out to the Japan Society for Promotion of Science, who funded a trip back in 2019 where the start of this research in Japan originated from, and I'm hoping to go back next year once it's open properly. A well-versed vehicle for sports diplomacy is hosting international sports events. Relevant to this event and the Basque Country being the tour of the Basque Country and the cycling event, and also the incident last summer around UEFA dropping Bilbao as a host city for Euro 2020. So why are events so well-versed and popular, but also quite a risk? Firstly, because it offers a global stage. Then secondly, because both traditional and non-traditional actors can use an event to further a particular goal or make a particular point. As we've heard from the speakers before me, the goals, voices, actions encompass a huge range of examples and contexts. The activities often connected to events, and thankfully a few speakers have flashed a spotlight on some of these, include exchanges, formal and informal educational programs, knowledge transfer, and what is becoming more and more well known as sort of satellite embassies that build into and happen during and after an event. My initial research on sports diplomacy and events has been mostly around the Summer Olympic Games and the power of the International Olympic Committee and the often neglected role, which is vitally important in my opinion, of organising committees. I considered this in more detail and have looked at London 2012 Summer Olympic and Paralympic Games and then the Tokyo 2020 (1) and looked at how their organising committees utilised educational programmes to reach children and young people with particular messages around disability, sport and Paralympic values. This research has allowed me to consider and experience different voices and actors in and around the international sports event spaces, most notably the International Paralympic Committee, which is a separate organisation to the International Olympic Committee, and people connected with parasports, disability sport or inclusive sport. I can't cover all of this today, so I've popped a couple of screen grabs on the slide and a few links in the blog post about some academic and practical resource on this debate. It's a real growing debate around disability and inclusion and diplomacy, and I really do encourage you to tap into it as I'm in the midst of it and very much enjoy debating this. What I want to focus on today is Japan. And on the previous slide, I'd sort of intimated that one of the dominant sort of tropes and narratives of sport events is the Western idea of what sport is, what an event is, and what diplomacy is. So being able and having the privilege to do some research into Japan has been excellent to sort of rupture this for me as a researcher. Very briefly, Japan is no stranger to hosting international sports events or para sports, and they are frequently referred to as a serial bidder and hoster. And Tokyo, in fact, has hosted the Stoke Mandeville Games in 1964, and I have the original poster on the slides, and then the Paralympics again in Tokyo for their 2020-2021 Games. Again, there are a number of excellent academic accounts of this activity and some are listed on the slide. A huge shout out to Dennis Frost's book, which captures really wonderfully the long history Japan has with the Paralympics and para sport. From my perspective, arguably Tokyo 2020-2021 included a significant increase in the visibility of the Paralympics, the International Olympic Committee, and what Japan terms para sports and disabled people. This is demonstrated, for example, in the left-hand corner of the slide, when from the outset of the bidding process, which started back in the 2000s and into the 2010s, the bidding committee for Tokyo symbolically and are arguably the first committee to deliver the bidding documentation as required to the International Olympic Committee in Lausanne, Switzerland, but then not required, they went the extra mile and delivered the documentation to the International Paralympic Committee at their headquarters in Bonn in Germany. A different debate for another day to why the IPC had decided to home themselves in Germany rather than Lausanne, Switzerland, but I'll leave that for you. The significance here is that from the bidding, from the outset, Japan has really put front and centre inclusion and disability and parasport. And one way they've done that is through the Sport for Tomorrow programme. So the following slides, I'm just going to walk you through some of what I see as the strengths as the Sport for Tomorrow programme. And again, you've got the link to this website in the pack, so please explore it at your convenience. The biggest strength, and most notably, is that this is not a static programme, and this is not where dominant voices or dominant activities, especially those that are regulated and endorsed by the Olympic Games, take front and centre. In fact, this has moved to a more dynamic and user-led content website, which allows for smaller and less dominant activities and programmes to run, allowing for different activities, voices and partnerships to be part of what we would see as sports diplomacy, which the Sport for Tomorrow programme encompasses. as you can see on the right hand side, through its 3 clear strands and goals. The other notable strength here is this hub consortium approach. So as you can see with the consortium members, there's a very strong mixture of public, private and not-for-profit organisations, which has allowed for this organic user-led content approach.
Excuse me, Verity, last minute here, okay?
Yep. The second and third strengths are the accreditation system and the activity reporting. So to date, there's been 624 activities logged on this website, and they can be filtered through a variety of mechanisms, including the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, allowing people with different vested impacts and different impact goals to log and accredit their particular activities. Notably here around the examples on disability sport, this Zimbabwe programme only impacted 21 beneficiaries. Arguably, this has allowed different voices and partnerships to come to the forefront of such a programme rather than those dominant bigger programmes. The final point I make before I wrap up is around the branding. So Sport for Tomorrow and the Japan Organising Committee took the decision alongside government partners to not brand it around Tokyo 2020-2021 like London did, for example. Instead, they've made it so that other events can tag into this, and we're seeing this play out as this website is still live and the World Masters Games is currently feeding into it. So to conclude, what needs to happen is for a successful, dynamic, user-led type of program to run, such as the Sport for Tomorrow program, there needs to be common goals and accessible platforms so more voices and activities gain recognition. A real positive of this was the ability for disability and inclusive programs and activities to come to the front of the Sport for Tomorrow and the Tokyo hosting of their games, and now Japan more broadly. I'll be discussing this at a number of different events, all are logged in the blog that I've posted, and thank you very much for listening to my 8 minutes, 10 seconds talk. Back over to you, John.
Thanks so much, Verity. Appreciate that. Just a couple of quick brief announcements too. We have one video that was taped for this first session, first part of it, Dr. Sarah Kelly's. We also have one coming up in the second part here by Edurne Pasavan. We will be sending those videos just in order to honor the time and not make this run too far over. So just know that we will be sending those out. We're looking forward to those. Our next presenter is Dr. Ellen Half-Davies. Ellen is the CEO of Operato Chair of Metabolic Support UK. Among her many accomplishments, Ellen is the first Welsh woman to row across the Atlantic Ocean. She was part of the first all-female crew to row across the Indian Ocean, and she completed a hat trick of ocean crossings when she later sailed across the Pacific. She uses her adventures as a platform to raise awareness about rare childhood disorders and the need to develop new drugs. What an important work you're doing, Ellen. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, diolch yn fawr iawn. I'm really delighted to be able to join you today. I'm just going to share a slightly personal story of how sport and enabled my experience to transcend across sport and medicine and interlinking my personal and professional life. So being Welsh, I was very fortunate to grow up on a very traditional farming upbringing where, pardon me, my brothers were always sort of outside farming. And my sisters and I had a more traditional expectations to be indoors to help with the sort of cooking and the cleaning, which never worked so well for me. And therefore, when I was 19, I moved down to London to start what was essentially my only career aspiration, which was to become a children's nurse. But having left North Wales and moved to London, it was quite a cultural shock for me. And I experienced what the Welsh known as hiraeth, which is just the longing for all things Welsh. I wasn't a very good singer, so I wasn't sort of really able to join the choirs here in London, but I did instead join the London Welsh rugby team. And London Welsh rugby team is like a little home from home where I was always welcomed with the Welsh culture. And playing rugby was a really instrumental part of my adult life. For those of you that may not be familiar with rugby, it allows for 15 very different positions on the pitch. And I often reflect that rugby and the team of players in rugby always reflect life itself, that it doesn't matter what size or shape you are, doesn't matter what skill you are, there are a place for you in society, and every team member is required on the rugby pitch in order to make a successful rugby team. And for that first 11 years of my time in London, I combined playing competitive rugby, Premiership at London Wasps, and then later up to Welsh student squad and Welsh senior squad. And the combination of rugby and nursing was sort of a dream come true. Having said that, I was sadly dropped from the Welsh rugby squad before getting my first full international cap. I was the non-travelling reserve for the World Cup, which, as many of you imagine, is the worst position ever, because you're sat at home while your teammates play rugby, and sadly wishing one of them may get injured so that you get the opportunity to fly out to the World Cup. And of course, that's not a healthy place to be as a teammate. But I was still immensely proud of my 13 A caps, but it hurt really when I was dropped from the squad, and it coincided with me going through a divorce. I couldn't afford therapy at the time, and as such, I decided I would row across the Atlantic. I'd never rowed before, I'd never been out to sea before, and I certainly didn't have the funds, the sponsorship funds to cover such an ambitious campaign. But never underestimate a woman on a mission, and myself and another nurse, Hardip Sidhu, we both set off on a 2-year campaign to learn how to row, to learn how to navigate across an ocean and to survive life at sea, and to prepare for the financial cost of sponsorship required. All of this was sort of campaigned as nautical nurses, and we built it as a campaign to raise awareness for rare inherited metabolic diseases. I don't think either Hardip and I could have ever anticipated what our row across the Atlantic would have been. I think if we'd have known the brutality of it, we probably would never have started. But what quickly emerged as we rowed across the ocean was that while it was really physically challenging on our bodies to be rowing for 12 hours a day, so we would be rowing 2 hours on, 2 hours off, 2 hours on, 2 hours off, day and night, and alternating so that one was sleeping while the other one was rowing. So the physical hardship of rowing 12 hours a day was exhausting, but actually it was the emotional and psychological part of it that was the hardest, and that was compounded by sleep deprivation. But our campaign became a bit of a glue that brought together a lot of the inherited metabolic disease community and raised the spotlight on the challenges of living with a rare inherited metabolic disease. So while we sort of did feel slightly sorry for ourselves that we were embarking on an incredibly hard challenge, we were also able to remind ourselves that this was a challenge that we had imposed on ourselves, which was very different to children and families that are born into a life of living with a rare metabolic disease through no choice of their own, and were by far showing greater courage and strength and resilience than we could ever show on a rowing boat. The trip across took 77 days, 7 hours and 37 minutes, and considerably longer than we had anticipated for it. But the success of the campaign for me was not that we had successfully rowed across the Atlantic. The success of the campaign was that we had raised £190,000 for metabolic research at Great Ormond Street Hospital, which funded Dr. Emma Footit to undertake a PhD to look at the value of vitamin B, in managing neonatal seizures. And the work has gone on to develop a lot of formulations that enhance the palatability and ability of young neonates to take vitamin C for the management of their seizures. And on a personal level, when I landed back in Gatwick after flying back from Antigua, I was welcomed by two patients, Mia and Henry. They were 4 and 5 years old at the time, and patients that I'd looked after throughout my career at Great Ormond Street Hospital. And they welcomed me with such pride to have followed me all the way across the Atlantic, that it felt like it had been a personal achievement, and that they had actually traveled with us across the ocean, and that we had been sort of living a little bit of their adventures as we carried through. So thank you so much for having the opportunity to share my personal experience. I'm going to hand over to the rest of the speakers now, and hopefully bring us back onto time for the agendas. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much. Appreciate that. Our next presenter is Gordon Miller. And these next presenters will really be focused in particular on sports and events in the Basque Country. Gordon is the founder and team leader of Ride for Freedom, a social enterprise with a mission to harness the university appeal of cycling to raise awareness, educate, and forge partnerships to end modern slavery, and to provide remedy to survivors. Gordon is also the two-time Guinness World Record title holder for the greatest distance covered by an electric bicycle in 1 week, and the largest GPS drawing by bicycle. So Gordon, welcome, and I'll turn this over to you.
Thank you so much, John. Very much appreciate that introduction. Also, thank you to Emily and to Gavin for the invitation to share my purpose with everybody today. Just to give a little bit of context to why I'm here today, primarily I'm a sponsor for Orbea, wearing their rather nutty cap here, which sits on my head quite a lot these days. So obviously, as many of you will maybe know, that Orbea is a core brand in the Basque Country, cycling brand, and as I say, I'm a proud ambassador for the Orbea. As John said, and I'll come on to a bit more context as to why the Basque region as well as we go forward. So, thank you again. As John said, I mean, just to give you a little bit of background to Ride for Freedom, which I founded in 2019, and I lead the initiative. As John said, our mission is to harness the universal appeal of cycling to raise awareness, educate, and forge partnerships to end modern slavery, and to provide remedies to survivors. We do this because there are more than 40 million people worldwide enslaved at any given time. Somebody pointed out to me the other day that that's the population of Canada, which gives it some context to how many people globally are enslaved. Without going into a huge exhaustive explanation of what that is, but just to give you an idea of what modern slavery constitutes under the Act in the UK, and also the definition that's been given to it by the United Nations. Actions such as human trafficking, such as debt bondage, such as labor exploitation, these all fall under the broader umbrella of modern slavery. So obviously it's a heinous crime. It is a crime, obviously, and it needs, in my opinion, it needs to be eradicated. And that was kind of what started my journey in this arena. And my background's in communications. I have a passion for cycling. Of quite a few years now, probably not all that many, but over the last 10 to 15 years, when I've got increasingly sort of passionate about my cycling. And as I studied more and became more aware of these issues around modern slavery, I got to the point where I wanted to do something to advocate, to raise awareness of the issue, but also to see what I could do to sort of help towards the eradication of it. So that's how this sort of formulation of Ride for Freedom began back in 2019, and subsequently our vision is a world where no child, woman, or man ever exists in modern day slavery, and that's what we're working towards, working with lots of partners, as I say, through our mission, through forging partnerships, through the education, and through the raising of awareness. One thing that struck me around 2020-21 was one aspect which we as much as raising awareness is and activating and agitating is a really important aspect of what we do. The part around supporting survivors was, if you like, the missing link in our activity. And so in 2021, we began a pilot program we've called Free Will by Ride for Freedom, which we did a pilot program that evidenced that survivors of modern day slavery are through cycling can be supported with their physical and mental health and well-being, and also with their independence and mobility. And subsequently, we've launched as a consequence of a successful pilot program, we've launched our Free Will program nationally in the UK. And literally 2 weeks ago, we began we opened and launched the first Free Will hub in London. The ambition is to roll it out nationally and internationally as well. And we put on a training session with which 9 survivors of modern day slavery through a charity referral partner attended the session, and were given training in road awareness and cycling proficiency. And at the end of the process, they were fully signed off as being a competent cyclist through the National UK Bikeability Scheme. So that was a really rewarding aspect of our enterprise. As I say, the ambition now is to roll this out nationally and to demonstrate how cycling goes beyond the sort of the immediate physical attraction for myself and enjoyment for myself, but also how it can help and support those who are vulnerable, and also who have experienced extreme traumas through actually being victims of modern day slavery themselves. So that's a little bit of context to who we are, what we've done, and what we're about. If what we have done in the last year, if somebody was to ask me that question, part of the process of the raising awareness is by undertaking personal cycling challenges myself. And that also helps us to fundraise for the activities to put the Free Will hubs on and to launch those hubs. So in 2021, as John referenced, I undertook a Guinness World Record challenge where I cycled from southern Spain, from Cadiz in southern Spain, all the way up to the UK, back up to London. And I did that over 18 days in 2021, from the 1st to the 18th of October. The first half of the journey from Cadiz to northern Spain, to Malavia, which is where Orbea are headquartered, was a 1,706 kilometer bike ride. And I did that on an Orbea Gain e-bike. The challenge was for an e-bike. I managed to find a challenge that I could fit within the time frame that I needed to do. And an existing Guinness World Record was already set, which was 1,020 miles, I think it was, something of that nature. So one that I could beat, I felt I could beat within my time frame that I had available to me to undertake this challenge on an e-bike. So it was a real thrill to ride through Spain. It was extremely draining, challenging. It was very exciting, and it was impactful as well. It had a huge amount of attention and coverage in the national press and the international press.
Gordon, excuse me, we want to show that video. So if you could wrap up this portion, because we want to make sure and ensure the Gorbea.
Okay, for sure, absolutely, John. So that's great. So that was in essence the challenge last year, which I undertook. And as I say, I spent a couple of days at the end of the challenge in San Sebastian, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Beautiful city, and I cycled a bit through the Basque Country as well on my way over to France. So I'll move on from that. What have I done this year? Very, very quickly. Literally yesterday, on the International Day of Sport for Development and Peace, I led an 85 kilometers bike ride between Burnley Football Club and Liverpool Football Clubs. Again, to raise awareness of the issues and to fundraise for Free Will by Ride for Freedom, and to empower survivors to cycle. So that was literally yesterday. Earlier, a couple of weeks ago, on the International Day of Remembrance for the Victims of Slavery and the Transatlantic Slave Trade. Bit of a mouthful, not my words, the United Nations definition. The commemoration day that it was, we launched the Free Will Hub, and I led a ride of 30-odd cyclists from a sports club in East London called Dagenham Redbridge Football Club, which are a non-league club. So just to give you a sense, this is grassroots stuff as well as it is international, as well as it is to Premier League clubs in the UK. And lastly, just before I finish up, in 2 weeks' time, 2.5 weeks' time, I'm leading a cycle around the German Bundesliga clubs between the 28th of April and the 15th of May to, again, using the blueprint of what Ride for Freedom does. We're going to cycle around the 18 cycling clubs, the 18 Bundesliga clubs to educate, raise awareness, forge partnerships. We're going to be doing a red card campaign, show the red card, which we're going to be cycling around as well. A good friend and the guy many of you will know, sports diplomacy chap called Dr. Simon Rofe is going to be joining me for a couple of the legs out in Germany as well. So looking forward to riding with Simon and the other team and several other people as well. So so that's it. That's what we do. That's our purpose, and that's my mission. So thank you very much to John, Imanol, Gavin, and everybody else. Cheers.
Thanks, Gordon. We'll cue the video now here.
Thank you.
The Basque Country, one of Europe's most enigmatic and romantic regions. I'm here in the glorious Euskadi to learn about the people, the history, and of course, the cycling. And in particular, at the heart of it all, one brand is ingrained within the Basque culture, Orbea. With roads like these and terrain like that, I mean, it's no wonder that Orbea was spawned in this region. I mean, how could you not be inspired to start a bike brand living in a place like this? But Orbea is more than just a bike brand. It embodies an entire culture.
We are passionate cyclists, we love cycling, and we try to create a bicycle that inspires people to keep on pedaling. So our first bicycle was launched to the market in 1931. More than 50% of our bicycles are personalized. So this is the fastest bike we ever designed. You look fast and powerful, so this is something you really will enjoy.
Heading out of Eibar, and we're immediately on one of the most famous climbs in the region.
Bueno, esta bici creo recordar que es de 2005, la estrenamos en el Tour, o la estrené en los Tours, bueno, en trabajar con la bicicleta Orbea, que es una bicicleta también de casa.
Designers, engineers, technicians, providers, they ensure a high level of expertise, and this team is keep on growing. We try to make Orbea better and to leave Orbea better to the next generation.
Oh, wonderful. Enjoyed that. We'll move on to another local business in the Basque Country, Wave Garden. I want to introduce Sean Young, who's the Destination Development Manager there at Wave Garden. Sean will show a short video and then showcase the story of this internationally successful Basque Surf Lagoon Engineering Company. It's a fascinating story. So I'll turn it over to you, Sean.
Hi, Sean. Buenas tardes. Good afternoon. And thanks for the invitation to the event. I'm delighted to be here and to introduce you to Wave Garden, which, as John said, is quite a unique surf park technology and development company based here in the Basque Country, and summarize some of the key ways that we think we are contributing positively to Basque sports diplomacy. So I'm just going to share my screen quickly. One moment. And screen 2, and then let me know if this is playing correctly. Everyone seeing that? So I guess the first thing is, why would a company invest in surfing? Surfing is now one of the fastest growing sports in the world, with significant growth during the COVID pandemic, as you can imagine. It's also very appealing to all ages, and the men, and particularly women, are getting more and more involved in the sport. And it's also one of the most addictive sports in the world, with many people, many passionate surfers actually wanting to be able to surf every day if that's possible. We also know that surfing brings in tourism. You know, a good surf beach brings in additional tourism into the local area. And in particular, we believe that it really helps deliver very positive social health and community benefits. But, and this is the key thing, access to quality surfing waves is very limited. And this is where Wavegarden comes in. So fundamentally, the aspiration is to create world-class and commercially viable man-made surfing destinations. And the vision for the company was and still is very simple. Basically, we want to share our passion and the exhilaration that we have of surfing perfect waves with everyone everywhere. So we now believe that we've delivered that, and I'm going to play you a 2-minute video that'll tell you a little bit about the company and our background, and then I'll complete that with talking about how I think we contribute to sports diplomacy.
Surfing is one of the fastest growing sports in the world and made its Olympics debut at the Tokyo 2020 Games. However, despite the sport's increasing popularity, for those without access to quality waves, surfing remains just a dream. Aiming to share the exhilaration of riding waves with everyone,
We cannot see the screen, the video.
Surfing and beach destinations. We offer the greatest variety of quality waves.
I understand you're not seeing the video. 1 second.
No, we have the sound, but we don't have the video, and we don't have the slide either.
Oh, okay.
You need to
All right.
share your screen.
Yeah, let me start with sharing the screen again to see what went wrong with that. Share, optimize. Yeah. Okay. Worked fine in rehearsal, of course. Are you now seeing my screen?
We can see that the PowerPoint, Sean, yes.
Yeah, let me start that here. And are you still seeing the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Great, apologies. Let me move forward to the video very quickly. And let me press play and see if this works.
Surfing is one of the fastest growing sports in the world and made its Olympics debut at the Tokyo 2020 Games. However, despite the sport's increasing popularity, for those without access to quality waves, surfing remains just a dream. Aiming to share the exhilaration of riding waves with everyone, Wavegarden has been leading the way in designing world-class surfing and beach destinations. We offer the greatest variety of quality waves, the highest user capacity, and the lowest energy consumption. It has a fully customizable footprint, providing up to 1,000 waves per hour, with a wave menu offering 25 different types of waves for all customer profiles. The result is a proven dynamic business opportunity, suitable for standalone surf parks, residential resorts, and large-scale mixed-use developments. Catching lots of waves in a controlled environment flattens the learning curve for beginners and provides the perfect training arena for high-performance surfing. With lagoon occupancy and the bottom line of surrounding businesses above forecast, 6 Wavegarden facilities are operating successfully in Brazil, South Korea, Australia, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom. Our technology is the most environmentally sustainable in the world today. The average hourly consumption is around 350 kilowatts per hour. 10 times less than pneumatic wave systems. This can represent savings of $2 to $3 million each year. Developments are fast underway to create the ultimate goal, a carbon-neutral Wavegarden surf park. Wavegarden promotes a healthy outdoor lifestyle, creates new employment opportunities, and delivers positive social and economic benefits to the local community. Our pursuit of excellence in the fast-growing sector of man-made wave lagoons has surged Wavegarden even farther ahead, enabling us to achieve our vision of sharing the exhilarating feeling of surfing great waves with everyone, everywhere. You guys are making history. You guys are changing the world.
Great. So let me then just continue quickly. In terms of our history, the company was founded in 2005 and spent about 10 years in research and development trying to come up with the best way of making artificial man-made waves. And we looked at looking at a circular wave. Our first product that people could come and surf was in 2009. And then this is our site in 2012. We had a full-scale facility built in the Basque Country as a test facility because we believe not just in designing something, but building it to full scale to test it. Our first commercial facility opened in Snowdonia, which is in the north of Wales, in 2015. But the sheer popularity of that facility, we realized quite quickly we needed to provide more waves. And because in that facility, we offered 2 waves every 2 minutes. So we went back to the drawing board. And by 2017, we had come up with what's called the Wave Garden Cove. And we went from offering and providing 2 waves every 2 minutes to 2 waves every 8 seconds. So that was a massive jump in terms of the technology and in terms of the viability of these projects. And that led us to start opening a number of commercial facilities around the world. In 2019 in Bristol, 2020 early in Melbourne, Australia, and the summer of 2020 in the Wave Park in South Korea in Seoul, followed by the image that you see here in Switzerland in February of last year, in 2020 or March of last year. We opened our facility and people are able to ski and surf on the same day in their trip to Switzerland. And then going from a cold weather climate to something a little bit hotter, this is our project in Sao Paulo. And hopefully you can see from this image that we spent as much time thinking about the beach component and bringing the beach to Sao Paulo as we did to the surfing. And then in terms of coming soon, we're extremely busy. We have 6 other projects in the construction phase in Brazil, in Scotland, 3 projects in the US and a project in Tel Aviv. And in addition to all of those, we actually have another 50 or so projects that are in the feasibility and design phase, different parts of that phase throughout the world. And as you can see, relatively well divided across the world, with over 20 projects in the Americas, 30 in Europe, and 22 projects in Asia area. So it's sort of difficult to sort of specify exactly what role we've been playing in supporting sports diplomacy. There's the obvious one of, we're promoting surfing, and Basque Country has a great reputation in a great number of ways. But I'd like to point out maybe 4 specific issues and then finish the presentation. The first one is that we have developers, investors, engineers visiting us from all across the world. And everyone is incredibly impressed with our technology, the high level of precision engineering and manufacturing, and how efficient really our technology is compared to anything else that's out there in the world. And the vast majority of visitors who come really were not aware of the Basque Country before visiting us. Last week, we had 3 different groups, a group from Utah, a group from Florida, and a group from Dominican Republic visiting us, for example. They're not really aware of the Basque Country's reputation and indeed its capability in terms for high-end engineering and manufacturing. So I do think we're playing a role in spreading awareness of that fact. Secondly, it may surprise you, but we actually played a very significant role in helping to get surfing into the Olympics. In the top left image there, the person on the right, Fernando Adriatholo, is one of the founders of the company and owners of the company. He went with the successful delegation, surfing delegation that went to Japan in the bid to try and get surfing introduced to the 2020 Olympics in Japan for the very first time. And that was obviously successful. And as a result, surfing, we hope, will continue within the Olympics for the foreseeable future. And our facilities, including our headquarters in the Basque Country, are becoming popular locations where international teams, surfing teams, are coming to visit. These are the French team, the Chinese team, the Japanese team, as example, that have all come to our facility in the Basque Country to train in advance of the Olympics and other surfing competitions. Third thing, number 3, really is that we're really excited about how our facilities have become extremely popular for adaptive surfers, because we can provide a very safe and controlled environment for hosting surfers with physical or mental health issues. And in fact, our facility in Bristol, which was one of the first to open, has now hosted the UK Adaptive Surfing Championships for the past 2 years and is planning to continue to do so for the foreseeable future. Last, but definitely not least, and in fact, probably the most important to us as a company, and it links back to our original vision for the company. Really, we are most proud that we are playing some role in connecting people around the world through our mutual passion for surfing and the health and social benefits that surfing provides. So I will leave it there. Thank you very much. Any questions, just drop me a note at any time. Thank you, John.
Thanks so much, Sean. This is a fascinating project, really is. Our next presenter, excuse me, comes from an academic perspective. Dr. Marianne Vacci is an assistant professor of Basque Studies in anthropology at the University of Nevada, Reno. She has worked extensively on the social, cultural, and political dimensions of sport in the Basque Country, Catalonia, Transylvania, and Hungary. And I will turn it over to Marianne.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me. And I'm trying to share my screen, but hold on. Okay, wait. Now you assigned me.
While you're doing that, Marianne, I'm just going to let people know that we are running a little bit over. We understand if folks need to go, but we just have so much great talent that we hope you'll stay with us, and we'll run just a little bit over. Thanks so much. Okay, Marianne.
I don't seem to be able to share my, have you assigned me host status? John? I don't seem to be able to share my PowerPoint.
Yep. Emmanuel, can tech please bring up that PowerPoint for her to be able to share?
Well, it's kind of changed. So
Here we go.
Okay, well, this is kind of the first version of it. Mine is slightly changed by now, but that's okay. This will work perfectly. So thank you for this introduction, John, and thank you, Emmanuel, also for the invitation. This is once again a fascinating international event. I'm zooming in from the University of Nevada, Reno, which is the University of Colin Kaepernick. He was a student athlete here, and people remember him fondly. So that's just once again showing you that el mundo es un pañuelo, right? It's a small world. I would like to start out with my personal story as well, because I feel that I'm also, in a sense, a product of Basque sport diplomacy. The way I ended up studying Basque sports, being from originally from Hungary. So when I first started to do my PhD, I wasn't really sure what topic to choose in anthropology and Basque studies. And I remember I spent the first semester of my studies kind of trying to figure out what topic what kind of focus to have. And that winter break, I went back to Hungary and met with some friends in Budapest, who asked me, so what are you going to write your dissertation on? And I said, well, I'm not sure, I'm still thinking. And one of them, who was a great sports fan, he said, well, why don't you just write about Athletic Bilbao? You know that they have this unique philosophy of recruiting Basque players only. And that stayed in my mind, and that's how actually it started. So it just goes on to say that one of the best forms of sport diplomacy is the kind of international visibility and likability that a unique brand can create, such as the brand of Athletic Bilbao, with this truly unique localist recruitment focus in the global elite sport world. Now, as an anthropologist, I would like to have approach this question of sport diplomacy a little bit from a more cultural perspective or anthropological perspective, and particularly with the question of why sport, right? Why is sport precisely this cultural terrain so uniquely qualified for sport diplomacy? And I would like to say, well, evidently it has giant popularity, giant visibility. Sport has become the global culture. Everybody can relate to it in some kind of way. If you think of the big events, Olympic Games, Football World Cup, Rugby World Cup, and how many people watch those worldwide, but even just the El Clasico, which last time I checked was viewed by 600 million people, the Super Bowl, 100 million people, tremendous numbers, right? But beyond that, I think sport is uniquely qualified for sport diplomacy is because of the nature of this cultural practice, because of its equality of chances. That's the basic framework of sport. That's the basic assumption of sport, that there is an equality of chances, and anyone can end up a winner, but the playing field is level. And I think that kind of basic assumption of sport creates a framework for sport diplomacy, where the two parties or several parties of the diplomatic terrain enter into a level playing field. And that's how sport is an excellent way of creating that context, that kind of framework. And then another important aspect is sports connotations with peace. I know George Orwell said that sport was war minus the shooting, and that's a very important qualifier. But if you think of it right from the beginning, going back to the ancient Greek Olympic Games, sports always had a connotation of peace. The Greek city-states suspended war in order to celebrate the ancient Greek Olympic Games. And later on, Pierre de Coubertin also used peace as an important factor in the Olympic message. Okay, and then furthermore, as an extension, sport can be therefore used as a metaphor through which we make sense of conflicts, including political conflicts. And I like to point out a few events. For example, the famous US-Chinese ping pong diplomacy. The sport itself, ping pong or table tennis, right? It already lends a certain aura or explanatory framework to the event of hardcore politics. You have table tennis where two actors are hitting a ball back and forth, so they are engaged in a kind of intensive exchange, right? Or, for example, the pelota game in the Basque context, and here you have some images that I prepared for you. The pelota game, many of you probably know the documentary by Julio Medem, the Basque ball, La Pelota Vasca, which is a political documentary about the conflict and violence of the past, Basque and Spanish, in Basque and Spanish relationships. And Medem used the pelota game as a master metaphor in that documentary. And it had tremendous explanatory power in a sense that it very well reflected Basque-Spanish political relationships in terms of this action-reaction type of intensive exchange. And then lately, which is my favorite example for sport as a metaphor explaining complicated social or political situations, is the pandemic itself. And the video that went viral about Basque deep sea rowing, or remo, or regatas de traineras, right? That particular video of Sandra Pinheiro, where she lost her pedal while competing with her team. And the video shows how she takes up the rhythm of the boat and her teammates without the pedal. And this became a kind of a metaphor once again for the pandemic. And the message obviously was that we are in the same boat, right? We have to deal with this pandemic situation together. No one's left behind, and the individual also has a responsibility towards the community. So I think this is the power of sport. Through images, events, we just understand messages way easier, and therefore sport as a cultural trope can be this great terrain of creating a framework for political exchanges. How much time do I have?
1 minute. Just 1 minute, if you could, Marianne.
1 minute. Okay, so I'm just gonna wrap it up. Here you see on my slide a few very minimalistic, right? A few possibilities of sport diplomacy, and I'm not going to go into them. You see the images themselves. Perhaps sport is an unofficial reason and place for leaders to meet. I was always just I'm an anthropologist and I look at the micro level of things, right? I was always wondering about the palco, the VIP booths of big football events. And I was invited to San Mamés a couple of times. And it was always interesting to me how, of course, this is a place for all kinds of political actors and economic actors to come together to watch the game. And it was always interesting to me as an anthropologist how in the VIP booth, nobody wears shirts or scarves. And that is my interpretation, because in there, which is the space of sport diplomacy, you suspend your tribalism. You go in there with an openness to the other and suspend your kind of tribal belonging. And it's an interesting little unconscious development that you see and how people express their openness. Then I'm going to finish here. Perhaps another instance to point out is the last one. Sport may create visibility for national consciousness, for the nation, for independence or autonomy aspirations. You can see that iconic image with Iribar and Cortabarria. And I'm going to finish there. There's so much to say about this, and I look forward to the opportunity to say more. Thank you.
Marianne, thank you very much, and especially for the rich work that you've provided. I've enjoyed reading it myself. Very thoughtful. Thank you so much. Our next presenter will be Kalle Karinen. Kalle is a US-born 3-time world champion athlete in the sport of cheerleading with the Finnish national team, and now travels internationally to work with other cheerleading athletes. She is also finishing her master's degree in linguistics and focuses on the role of sports in Basque language normalization and revitalization. Pleasure to have you here, Kalle. Take it over.
Hi, I just want to check you can see my screen and hear me.
Yep.
Yes, perfect. I want to, just as everyone else has said, extend my gratitude to Emmanuel and also to Gavin for organizing this event. I'm going to try to speed through this in less than 5 minutes. So yeah. Okay, so I am Kalle Karinen. I was born in the US. I have Finnish heritage from over 100 years ago. Long story short, ended up in Finland through cheerleading. I'm going to university thanks to cheerleading and traveling through the world, going to Spain, to Chile, and then ending up here. And I'm going to give you a very brief introduction to cheerleading, tell my story, and how all of this led me to study language revitalization and Basque as the case study. So I was writing an application recently for a grant, and this was just a quote that I really liked. I took out of it, kind of summed up how my life led to this point. So I could never have imagined that signing up for cheerleading as a child would have eventually opened the doors to higher education, foreign studies, and an international sports community. Cheerleading unexpectedly became the catalyst that set me off on a path to new opportunities, including becoming a 3-time world champion with Finland, the nation of my heritage. And below was in other languages for accessibility. So born in Michigan, and then I started cheerleading when I was 9 in 2005. Once I was 13, I was traveling 5 hours one way to go to trainings. To be able to access the level of training I needed wasn't available in Michigan. So that's really kind of when I started expanding my network within sports. And cheerleading is a very global sport and something that's connected through the internet. So through all the online forums and things like that, I was able to expand into Chicago to join this club to reach the elite level. After that, I went to university in Oklahoma, where I competed at the national level, placing well at university competitions. And then I decided to go on exchange to Spain. This was the first time I got in contact with the Basque Country. I visited Bilbao for a weekend, and that's kind of where I started to get that kind of like, oh, the Basque Country, interesting. And there was when I learned about Basque rural sports and also about the Basque language. Before going to Spain, unfortunately, I didn't realize the rich linguistic diversity. Then I took another route. I went to Chile to study Chilean Spanish. From there, I ended up coming to Finland to learn Finnish, to connect with my heritage, and it ended up landing me on the Finnish national team unexpectedly. A few years ago, I was the head coach of the Spanish national team for cheerleading. A lot of people don't realize that cheerleading exists in Spain. It's very small. It does not exist in the Basque Country, at least not yet. And I won the world championship with the cheerleading team in 2018, 19, and 21. And next week, I leave for the world championships that will take place in the US. And I'm currently working on my master's thesis, which will look on at the role of sports in language revitalization in the Basque Country. Briefly, what is cheerleading? I'm not going to go through this because I'll show you a 30-second video, but it is a global sport available in over 80 countries. There are divisions with male and female, and then all female divisions. And it is composed of a routine that has 30 seconds of shouting, so a cheer section, followed by 2 minutes and 30 seconds of a routine. So here's a quick 30-second clip.
We met up with some warriors, so fierce she slayed the day. Back with the vengeance, world champ legends.
Yeah, so that clip just shows you a few of the different dynamics that you find in cheerleading. So baskets, tumbling, stunts, pyramids, and the cheer section. So very quickly going through that just so you have an idea of what I'm doing. How did this all lead me to the Basque Country? So when I first visited the Basque Country in 2015, I learned about the Basque Country in my Spanish culture course, learned about escupilota and a lot of other Basque sports that just seemed really surprising to me. I liked lifting people, and Basque people liked lifting rocks. So it was something that just really stood out to me. Visited, and the first thing that really stood out is the Basque language itself. So I saw it everywhere, but at the time I heard it nowhere. So I was, of course, in a lot of tourist areas, but in Bilbao, I was not. I saw the language written, and I just did not hear it, and it got me interested in the Basque language itself. So from there, I ended up coming to Helsinki, staying here, partly because the university has a minor in Basque studies, which I have completed, and through that have been involved with various events offered by Etxepare. So Korrika, for example, and that's one of the main events that got me really interested in studying the role of sports. I mean, you just see the huge amount of Basque people across the entire country running over the 11 days. I've organized events that have to do with the Basque diaspora. So looking, collaborating with Anne-Marie, which you guys may know as Hella Basque from YouTube, talking about her father's story, immigrating to the US. And yeah, I've been to the Basque Country multiple times and hoping to complete my master's thesis this year. So hopefully that was quick and short enough as possible. And thank you guys for your time.
Thanks so much, Kay. Appreciate your work. Yeah, good stuff. Okay, next up is Roberto Olave, who currently serves as the football director of Real Sociedad and previously managed several professional teams in Spain, such as Real Valladolid, Almeria, and Eibar. In 2021, Roberto was nominated for the prestigious Globe Awards in the category of Best Sporting Director of the Year. And I will turn this over to Roberto.
Hi, thank you for the invitation, John. Good evening, everybody. So I am football director, but I will try to don't speak about football, okay? During the next 10 minutes, okay? I want to speak about one amazing project, Real Sociedad, but regarding the some impacts that we have around the project, okay? Some impacts like the impact of the region and the impact of the people, okay? So to understand what we think and what we do is not possible if we don't consider our people in the region, okay? Maybe you can understand that football or Real Sociedad are doing some things good because we are working really good. I want to start speaking about our social environment, okay? I think that is really the key, because in our social environment, we have some sport people that really in a lot of variety sports like ice hockey, like swimming, like basket, woman, men, like handball, woman, men, like hockey, like athletics, bikers, pelota vasca. We have a lot of talent, and I think that we have a lot of talent, and the base of this talent is our social environment. Okay, it's our society. Maybe we can speak. I repeat and repeat that maybe people know about the La Cuadrilla. La Cuadrilla is one concept that we have here in the Basque Country. Okay, another concept is like Sociedad Gastronómica, Choco. You know, this concept help us to understand our values and our behaviors later in this sport, collective sport. We can speak about also about the people that are running by the city every single day. As you know, we have one event. The name is Beovia San Sebastian, one half marathon. I think that everybody know about. And usually we are running around 30,000 people. These 30,000 people, we have 90,000 people from the region. And you know, to run one day is one effort, but to run every single day is one commitment, is a behavior. And this kind of people is the parents, the fathers of our boys, of our girls. Okay, that's why that we in Real Sociedad, we have some important things. Okay, the impact of our history, the impact of our people, the impact of our region, and we want to work together in terms of stability. Okay, something like that. Just to make a context. Okay, as everybody know, I think that Gipuzkoa is a smaller region in Spain. We have a lot of people, elite, making sport. With this kind of this number of population, okay, more than 700,000 people, and I repeat, we can speak about elite handball woman, handball basket, hockey woman, handball men, football woman, football men, bikers, mountaineers, a lot of people. Athleticism, the last one, a lot of people that really they are doing one excellent paper in the sport. Okay, that's why that for us is very important to understand the philosophy, and the philosophy is regarding our history, the history of Real Sociedad. As you know, the club is we had more than 100 years, but one of the most important things is when we start with the youth people, okay, and 1951 is the first time that we had our first junior team. 1962 is when the club decided to have the first reserve team, Sanse name, and in 1980 we were champions. Also, we were champions 1 year ago. This kind of things is impossible to understand without the impact of our people and without the impact of the model of a territory. Okay, that's why I want to show you some data. Right now, in our stadium, new stadium, amazing stadium, we have the record of the people that is tickets yearly that we have in the club. Okay, the percentage of the people represented the most important number in Spain. Okay, this is our truth. This is the reality. People around our club, our team, pushing and helping, trying to grow. Okay. When we speak about project, I don't speak about the challenges because sport management. When we speak about the project, I want to show you the 4 pillars in terms of model. Okay, first one, the identity model. The identity model always will be related with our history, our social affective environment, with one transversal relation. Okay. The second one will be our management model. Management model is in terms of efficiency, in terms of balance, in terms of sustainability. Okay. The third one will be the development model. Is more related with the sport. Okay. We want to have one concept that is each single player that we have, men, women, is a project. Okay, and that's why we want to differentiate each single player that we have here with one pathway that we want to work together in terms of education, and one, for me, magic word that okay is stability. Stability for us is key. Okay, and finally, the game model. Okay, game model. When we speak about the game model, we speak about past, like a communication channel. We speak about the space, like where we are living, and we speak about transition. Okay, but if you can see all together, we will speak about our people. We will speak about the percentage of the people that are going to the stadium. We're speaking about our clubs, agreement clubs that we have working with us. We are speaking about a lot of philosophical things. Okay, just to understand a little bit the numbers and to change from the philosophy to the numbers. It's important to have this picture. Okay, in the last 20 years, Real Sociedad is signing more than 600 players. Okay, and you can see some good data, like okay, how many people is arriving to the league, how many people is arriving to the first team, how many people. But for us, the most important data is how many time is working with us. The average of these more than 600 players that are arriving from our territory is more than 7.5 years. This is stability. To be stable, I think that it's not important to have quality, technical, tactical. To be stable, you need to have one good environment. You need to understand what we can do at the middle of who, at the middle of the social environment, at the middle of the family environment, at the middle of the academic environment, at the middle, finally, of the all emotional environment that we have with every single boy that we have in the academy. Okay. It's not possible because the football is the final of the end. Sorry, the end of the road. Okay, the end of the pathway. Before the football, we need to understand the boy, the girl is no architect with 12 years old. Is no I don't know, director of an orchestra with 14 years old. Is not pilot with 16 years old, and we don't want.
Roberto, excuse me. We're gonna ask you to finish up if you could within the minute.
Yes, sorry.
Could you finish up, please, within the minute?
Yes, 1 minute. Yes, 1 minute. Yes, 1 minute, please.
Thank you so much.
To finish, okay, to end, okay. Just the numbers, okay, and just to understand two important things, okay. These important things. The value of education is to prepare young people for the future. It's not what we are doing now. It's what we are preparing for the future. And the second thing is it's not as fast as possible. It's when you are ready to arrive, okay. And for everything, every single thing that we have at the middle, we need the people around. We need our region. We need the impact of our clubs. We need really the participation of all the territory, okay. Just to finalize, okay. In the last 2 years, the power of this project is the people around our region, okay. 27 people that arrive with around 13 years old, and they are working with us more than 10 years. Okay, just to understand the important thing that we have to consider our region, our people, our history. Okay, thank you very much, and sorry because my English. Okay, take care.
Oh, thank you very much, Roberto. You did a nice job. Yeah. Our next presenter, Clara Azurmendi. Clara is an elite Basque badminton player who won a bronze medal at the Baku 2015 European Games in the women's singles event. Clara won her first major title at the 2016 Bulgaria International Tournament and competed at the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. So, Clara, we'll turn it over to you.
Hi, good night. First of all, thank you for inviting me tonight here, and I will try to briefly explain a little bit of my life until today. So I am a professional badminton player. I'm from San Sebastian, and I started playing badminton at the age of 7 in my school at San Sebastian. At the beginning, it was just because of my old brother. So I just started playing badminton because I want to play and have past time with him. So it's just because I enjoy the time I was playing there. So after 2 years, I moved to the club because everyone say to me that I really have to play more because I have good qualities. So I with my parents, and they told me to move to Madrid to the National Center because they thought that I could be better if I moved to Madrid and just train more and all the stuff. So I do that, and with 14 years old, I moved to Madrid, just leave my family and all the things that I have in San Sebastian. So it was a hard decision for me, but I knew that if I want to improve my badminton and my career, I have to do that. So I just make the decision and move. And yes, I think all of my life, it's now around on badminton. So I'm just focusing on my career, training 6-7 hours per day. And I am quite happy to all my goals. My achievements are going well now. So I think the most important thing for me was this past summer. So I could be in Tokyo. I can compete at my first Olympic Games. And it was an amazing experience for me. So hopefully not my last Olympics. I will try and I will fight to be in Paris in 2024. So it's just a little bit resume of my life. And yeah, that's all. So just thank you. And I hope you can enjoy and see all the athletes. So we did this for everyone. So yeah.
Thanks so much, Clara. Appreciate it. Hats off to you and best of luck as you continue your career with badminton. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Our next presenter is Juan Ignacio Zuleika. He's a legendary professional highlight player and expert commentator on this unique Basque sport. Juan is now an influential voice on Basque culture, sport, and heritage, and regularly writes on these themes for the Basque Tribune news platform, and currently writes about highlight on the blog Zuleika's Chit Chat. So, Juan Ignacio.
John, eskerrik asko Imanol, thank you everybody, thank you all the panel. John, if you don't mind, I'd like to make a proposition. If you think fine, let's think about a unique brand representing the Basque Country with international market, creating a lot of jobs and lasting, let's say, for 100 years. A new brand. Well, don't worry, because I know that it's a tough task. It's an impossible task to think about that. But the good news is that the Basques, we have done that already. It's called professional highlight. The fastest ball sport in the world. It's been publicized and it's known in many parts of the world. See? And also, I think highlight, professional highlight, it's one of the first multinational corporations in the Basque Country, at least. All began 150 years ago or so when Basque people emigrate in a large scale, and they took with them their habits, their work ethic, and also their sports, and the subculture of the sport, which is varying. So they began contracting, they began bringing players to Argentina, signing up contracts to play seasonal, and the successful was so great that after Argentina, they opened new frontons in Cuba, in Mexico, and also in Italy, El Cairo, Alejandria. We're talking about the beginning of the 20th century. And then the sport spread all over China, Shanghai, Tianjin, the Philippines. And well, I'm not going to extend because I know that we don't have too much time, but to have an idea of what I'm talking about, I will say that since the beginning until now, 4,000 professional players are being counted, 4,000. And besides that, all the jobs that are included with the highlight industries. And let me tell you a little bit about my own story. See, I'm a former highlight player, like you said. I began learning the skills when I was 9 years old. There were a couple of highlight schools all over the Basque Country, even in the French or the Spanish part. And when I began learning the job, I knew that I want to go to other places, see, because older players will come, and some were coming from Philippines, others from Miami, Mexico, Cuba. And it was like a sweet promised land to become a highlight player. And when I was 14 years old, I became a professional player at Zaragoza. A year later, I went to Italy, Milan, and then back to Barcelona. And when I was 17, I signed a contract to play in Tampa, Florida. And then I spent 8 years playing in Tampa and another 6 years playing in Bridgeport, Connecticut, near New York. And I always felt that I was a little bit more than an athlete, a professional sports player. I have the feeling that I was some kind of diplomat sometimes, an ambassador, and also a militant of what was like to be a Basque, what was like highlight, and what we represented, because it's a unique sport. It's an evolution of, like Marianne said, of some forms of ancient ways of playing pelota. Highlight evolved as society evolved in the Basque Country. And then, well, the thing is that I don't want to take too much time, but in 1988, 600 players in the United States in 16 frontos, we went on a strike against the management. The strike lasted about 3 years. And I've been thinking a lot about that, because it is the longest sports strike in the US and probably in the world. And why the Basques were capable to last so much. And the thing is that we are related to our political culture. We were living in the US, but living in a tribalism way of the cohesion was so strong that when we decided to strike against the companies, there was such a feeling of collective representation of what was being a Basque and what was, we were representing a way of struggling, the way of defending our rights. That's why highlight is not being only a business, an industry depending on betting, but also I think we have done a tremendous job as sports diplomacy and showing the world what is the Basque Country, and also an autochthonous sports like it's highlight, because it's unique. Okay, and also I think the contribution of highlight has been very great as far as the diaspora, because not only players travel to far places, but some of them got married and stayed there, living there. For instance, my older brother played in Miami and he got married there and he lives in Florida. My son went to play highlight as well and he got married there and he lives there, and I have 2 children, 2 US American children. So that's why I'm saying that the shadow of highlight is very, very, very big.
About one more minute, if you could, please. Thanks so much.
The bad news is that after 1988, the frontons were closing like a domino effect because of the strike, and the government, the state government, went changing the laws, and new forms of betting start. You know, highlight lost its monopoly in a way. Well, the thing is that it's the first time in 150 years that there is not a single fronton outside the Basque Country. First time. The good news is that this kind of rebirth in the Basque Country as far as highlight, and the hope is that, like Stuart said, highlight is a gold mine. For me, I interpret highlight as a gold mine. It has future possibilities, not as depending on betting, but as a spectator sport. I think in the long run, we have a pretty good possibility of contributing to represent the Basque world and also the diplomacy. And that's about all. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for that presentation. I hope we get to see highlight again here in the United States and other places around the world. Yeah, okay. Very interesting.
Thank you.
Okay, that Juan Ignacio is our last speaker. We just have a couple closing words here to wrap things up. The first is just what a wonderful number of presentations that we have had, so rich, more than frankly we could do in 2 hours, obviously, but we hope to continue this conversation with webinars in the future. And so to that end, we'll be sending out an email. Imanol and Donostiako Kultura will be sending out an email to ask those that are interested to join in a continued conversation around the power of sports diplomacy, particularly in the Basque Country, but beyond that as well. So please know that will be coming to you. It's obviously just a voluntary option, but we hope that many will sign up, that all will sign up, and we can continue this conversation. One last comment I want to have, and then I'll turn it over to Imanol, and that's just a sincere thanks. And if we can give both Imanol and Gavin a kind of virtual round of applause, if you would join me. I think that's a tremendous amount of work that they have done. Imanol and Gavin both worked hours and hours putting all of this together, starting from scratch and taking a big step forward in all this work. So hats off to you, Imanol, and to Gavin Sorionak. And with that, Imanol, I'll turn it over to you for final words.
Okay. Yeah, we still have 40 people. So you and Eros, I mean, you deserve a dinner, a beer, to invite you to a cider house. You know, my friends from my hometown, Oñati, we had a big lunch on Saturday, and they told me, it's about 2 hours. Yeah, they thought that it was for 2 days, this webinar. Anyway, so thank you very much. I mean, I really appreciate your passion, your participation. I mean, and you know, this is the first step for a long journey, believe me. I mean, Basque people are serious people. And when we say that this is the first step, it's the first step for the long, long journey. I hope we will keep in touch and we continue to collaborate to build a better world through the sport. And really, I wish you happy Easter. Next week is a happy Easter. And really, for my heart, eskerrik asko, Later arte, please have a good night. And again, eskerrik asko. And eskerrik asko, John, eskerrik asko, Gavin, for your wonderful job. And hopefully next year, I think we will be together here in Donostia. The idea we have in mind, and this is something very serious, is to organize a World Congress, not for 2 hours, for 3 days. So in 3 days, for sure, you will have more time. And yeah, so eskerrik asko guztioi. Eskerrik asko. Agur guztioi. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Agur.
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 Agur. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.